You're standing 4 feet behind the most powerful person on Earth, and your only job is to die first. 1 earpiece, 1 radio, half a second to decide between a threat and a headline. You didn't start here. You started in a room, wired to a machine, terrified of what they'd find. Level 0, who you are about to become. This is your life inside the United States Secret Service, from the day you apply to the day you might stand between a president and a bullet. Every rank you climb strips away who you used to be and rebuilds you into someone who can absorb violence without flinching. You'll chase counterfeiters through back alleys before you ever guard anyone important. You'll spend years proving you can be trusted with a life that isn't your own. Right now, you're nobody, a name in a file. Let's see if you make it. Level 1, the applicant. You mail in your application already knowing the odds are against you. The Secret Service accepts a small fraction of the people who apply. Most don't make it past the paperwork. You spend the following weeks refreshing your email, replaying every answer you gave on the forms, wondering if one careless word in a college essay from years ago is about to end this before it starts. Then comes the part that breaks people before they even begin, the background investigation. Investigators call your high school teachers, your ex-girlfriend, your college roommate from a decade ago, the one you haven't spoken to since graduation, and now suddenly hope remembers you kindly. They pull your credit history, your travel records, every address you've ever lived at, every job you've ever quit. They want to know if you drink too much, lie too easily, or owe the wrong person money. Because a Secret Service agent with debt is a Secret Service agent someone could buy. A single unpaid bill from years ago resurfaces in an interview, and you have to explain it to a stranger holding your entire future in a manila folder. Then the polygraph. You sit in a small, cold room, wired to a machine, while an examiner asks you questions about drug use, financial crimes, loyalty, secrets you'd forgotten you were even carrying. Your heart pounds even when you're telling the truth, because you know the machine doesn't care about your intentions, only your physiology. Some candidates fail here not because they lied, but because fear itself spiked the needle. You watch the examiner's face for any flicker of reaction and find nothing. You leave without knowing if you passed. Weeks of silence follow. You start telling yourself it's over, that no news is bad news. You go back to your regular job, half convinced you imagined the whole process, catching yourself refreshing your inbox during meetings, on drives home, in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. Friends ask how the application is going, and you've stopped having an answer that doesn't sound like a lie. Then, finally, a conditional offer arrives in your inbox, and you read it 4 times before you believe it's real. You call the one person who knew you'd applied, and your voice cracks on the second sentence in a way that surprises you. You didn't get a job. You got a chance. Level 2. The recruit at FLETC. You arrive at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and immediately understand you're not special anymore. Every recruit around you was also the best in their old life, a cop, a soldier, a top graduate. Here, you're just a body that hasn't proven anything yet, standing in a line at 5 in the morning while an instructor studies your face like he's already deciding who won't make it to graduation. The Criminal Investigator Training Program comes first, shared with recruits from a dozen other federal agencies. You learn the law, search and seizure, use of force, the Constitution, not as an abstract subject, but as the exact line you're legally allowed to walk up to and never cross. You learn evidence handling, interviewing techniques, courtroom testimony. A mistake here doesn't just fail you. It can free a guilty man years from now in a trial you haven't even imagined yet because of a form you filled out wrong today. Then the physical grinds you down. Defensive tactics leave bruises you'll still feel a week later. You're paired against recruits twice your size and told that size won't matter if your technique is right, and you learn, painfully, that it's true. Firearms training repeats the same draw, the same trigger press, thousands of times in heat and rain until your hands stop shaking and start remembering instead of thinking. An instructor stands behind you shouting numbers while you reload, and your fingers fumble the magazine the first dozen times before something in your body finally clicks into muscle memory. You watch recruits quietly disappear. Some fail out, some quit in the middle of the night. Some simply vanish from the dorm one morning without a goodbye, their bunk stripped bare before breakfast. Every empty bunk is a reminder This can still end for you, too. You start sleeping with your boots by the bed, half expecting to be woken for a run you weren't warned about. By the final week, you barely recognize the person who first stepped off the bus. That was the point. Level 3. Special Agent Training. You survive FLETC. Now comes Secret Service-specific training at the James J. Rowley Training Center in Maryland. And this is where the job stops being generic law enforcement and starts becoming something else entirely. You learn protective formations, how to move as a human wall around a principal without looking like one, how to shift your weight so you're already leaning toward danger before you've consciously seen it. You learn to scan a crowd of thousands and isolate the one person whose body language doesn't match everyone else's, the one who isn't cheering, isn't filming, is only watching. Instructors run attack scenarios, using role players with fake weapons and a mock motorcade, cameras rolling so every response can be studied afterward. The first time one lunges at your protectee, your body freezes for a half second too long. That half second, in real life, is the difference between a headline and a funeral. You are told this, bluntly, more than once, and it settles into you differently than any classroom lesson ever has. You train on protective intelligence, how to read a threatening letter, a stalker's escalating pattern, a fixation that's building towards something. You learn that most attacks on public figures aren't sudden. They have a trail, a paper history of warning signs, and your job is learning to see that trail before it ends in violence, rather than after. A classmate you've grown close to during training, someone who pushed you to run faster, react quicker, think sharper, washes out during the final evaluation. You watch him pack his bag in silence, and for the first time, you understand this job doesn't just cost you sleep. It costs you people. Graduation isn't a celebration. It's a transfer order, handed to you like the beginning of a sentence you volunteered for. Level 4, Rookie Special Agent, Field Office. Here's the part almost nobody expects. You don't start near the president. You start chasing money. Assigned to a field office, you spend your early years investigating financial crimes, counterfeit currency, credit card fraud rings, cyber intrusions into banks, identity theft networks moving millions across borders. This is the Secret Service's founding mission, older than its protective role by decades, and it's where you earn your investigative instincts. You work a case for months, surveillance in a parked car that smells like cold coffee, cultivating an informant who trusts you a little more with every meeting, subpoenas that take weeks to return, late nights reading spreadsheets until the numbers blur into meaningless columns of digits. You start recognizing patterns your supervisor didn't even point out, and for the first time, you feel like an investigator instead of a trainee wearing the title. Finally, you execute a raid on a counterfeiting operation running out of a warehouse. Your hands shake going through that door, adrenaline flooding a body that's never done this for real before. Every rehearsal and training suddenly feeling insufficient against the real weight of the moment. You make the arrest. You testify in federal court weeks later, your voice steadier than you expected, and watch a jury believe the case you built. Not every case ends cleanly. One investigation you pour 8 months into collapses when a key witness disappears before trial, and you're left explaining to your supervisor why the resources didn't produce a conviction. It stings in a way you weren't prepared for. The first real taste of a job where effort doesn't guarantee an outcome, and where the people you're chasing are often smarter, better funded, and more patient than you expected. This isn't glamorous. There's no crowd, no motorcade, no precedent. But this is where you become someone who can be trusted with bigger things. Because if you can't handle a fraud case with discipline and a failed one with composure, no one is letting you near a head of state. Level 5, Temporary Protective Duty. Then the call comes. You're assigned to a protective detail, temporarily at first, often during a campaign season or a major international summit, when the agency needs every trained body it can get. You stand a post for the first time. Not chasing anyone, just watching. Hours of stillness where nothing happens, your feet aching inside dress shoes never designed for standing this long, followed by seconds where everything could happen at once. You learn the exhausting truth of protective work. It's boredom that never fully lets its guard down, because the one time you do is the time it matters. You work your first large public event. Thousands of people pressed against a rope line. Your zone barely 30 feet wide. A man reaches into his jacket. Your hand moves before your brain finishes the thought. Your body already stepping between him and the principal. It's his phone. You breathe again. heart hammering, face carefully blank, so no one around you even notices. This happens more than the public will ever know. The invisible near misses that never make the news because agents did their job. You go home that night, unable to fully relax, replaying every hand that moved toward a pocket, every face in the crowd you're not sure you actually saw clearly enough. Level 6, Permanent Protective Assignment. You earn a permanent protective assignment, and now you learn the part of the job the public never sees. Days before a protectee arrives anywhere, you're already there, walking the venue alone at odd hours, timing exits with a stopwatch, identifying sight lines a shooter could use from a parking garage 3 blocks away, coordinating with local police, hospitals, and fire departments who are trusting you to tell them exactly what you need and why. You build what's called the motorcade route, choosing streets not for speed, but for survivability, avoiding choke points where a vehicle could be trapped between buildings with no way out. You learn the hospital nearest every stop, its trauma capability, its blood supply, because part of your job is being ready for the outcome you're trying to prevent. You never say this out loud to anyone outside the job. It would sound morbid. Inside the job, it's just Tuesday. On one advance, you flag a rooftop across from the venue that the local police insist is a non-issue. Locked, unused, no history of access. You push anyway, trusting instinct over paperwork, and post an agent there regardless. Nothing happens that day. You never find out if you were right to worry, and you learn to live with that particular kind of uncertainty. Because in this job, being wrong and being cautious can look identical from the outside. The first time your advance work executes flawlessly, the motorcade moves exactly on schedule, the principal is safe, the event ends without incident, nobody claps. Nobody even notices. You realize the entire measure of success in this career is that nothing happened. You did your job perfectly, and the reward is silence. And somehow, that silence becomes the thing you're proudest of. Level 7, Shift Leader. You're given agents to lead now, a shift on a protective detail, responsible not just for your own reactions, but for coordinating a team's. You assign posts based on strengths you've spent years learning to see in people. You review protective intelligence reports before a trip, cross-referencing names against files, deciding which threats are noise and which deserve a knock on someone's door. You're the one who has to decide, in real time, whether an unscheduled stop is worth the exposure. A decision made in seconds that could look either brilliant or reckless, depending entirely on what happens next. This is where fear changes shape. It's no longer just about your own reaction time. It's about whether you trained your people well enough that their reaction time is also fast enough. You lie awake before major trips running scenarios in your head because if something goes wrong now, it isn't only your failure, it's everyone's under you. A colleague you trained years earlier makes a split-second call during an incident on your shift correctly. It's over in 3 seconds, resolved so cleanly most of the crowd never even registers it happened. You feel something you don't have a name for, pride tangled with the specific retroactive terror of what could have happened if he'd hesitated. Level 8, Special Agent in charge of a field office. You're promoted off the protective line and given command of an entire field office, dozens of agents, both investigative and protective responsibilities across your region. You no longer stand posts, you build strategy. You manage budgets, oversee ongoing financial crime investigations, coordinate with police departments and other federal agencies, and brief headquarters on threats developing in your territory. It's a different kind of pressure, less adrenaline, more consequence, the kind that keeps you at your desk long after everyone else has gone home, staring at a threat assessment, trying to decide if it's real. A case one of your agents is running stalls for months, evidence thin, a suspect who seems to vanish every time they get close. You have to decide whether to keep resources on it or reassign your people elsewhere, knowing either choice carries a cost you might not see for years. A missed pattern in a threat assessment here doesn't just risk one event, it risks a life you never even met in person. You find yourself missing the rope line, the stillness, the one job in front of you instead of 100 competing ones. Command is respected, but something in you quietly grieves the agent you used to be. Level 9, Presidential Protective Division, PPD. Then comes the assignment every agent secretly measures their career against, the Presidential Protective Division. This is the summit. You are now inside the closest ring around the President of the United States, the last line. The agents who move when the crowd moves, who ride in the follow-up vehicle, who stand at the door of the Oval Office and outside the family's private quarters. Your background has been re-scrutinized beyond anything before. Your reflexes have been tested beyond anything before. There is no higher trust the agency can extend to a human being than this. You study the history that built this division's discipline, the assassination of a president decades before the service existed to guard him, and the attempt that nearly succeeded on a rainy day in 1981, when an agent's reaction in under 2 seconds is still taught as the standard every recruit is measured against. You understand, standing here, that you are the living continuation of every lesson bought with someone else's blood. The weight of this post is different from anything before it. You don't get to have an off day. You don't get to be tired, distracted, or human in the way everyone else is allowed to be. History doesn't wait for you to feel ready, and you carry that knowledge onto every rope line, every stage, every open car door for as long as you wear this assignment. There's a particular moment early in this assignment that stays with you forever. The first time you physically move the president with your own hands, redirecting him away from a crowd surge that wasn't a threat, but felt like one in the half second you had to decide. He barely notices. You notice everything. Your pulse doesn't come down for an hour, and nobody around you ever knows it spiked at all. Level 10, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, PPD. You move into a leadership role within PPD itself, coordinating shifts, protective intelligence, and advanced teams for the most protected human being on the planet. Every trip, domestic or international, runs through decisions you help shape, sometimes weeks in advance, sometimes with only hours of warning when plans change without notice. You now carry a knowledge most people never will, the specific, credible threats that never make the news, the plots interrupted before they became headlines, the countries where the threat level triples the moment the motorcade lands and every agent's posture changes without a word needing to be spoken. You carry this silently because you signed on to protect not just a person, but the peace of mind of everyone around him. There are nights you can't tell your own family what kept you at the office until 3 a.m. You watch your children grow up in fragments between deployments, missing birthdays for reasons you're not allowed to explain. You've become someone who holds the nation's fear so the nation doesn't have to, and the cost of that is paid quietly, at home, by people who never signed up for it themselves. Level 11, Deputy Director. You step back from direct protection entirely now into agency-wide leadership, overseeing both the protective and investigative missions across the entire Secret Service, from counterfeiting task forces to the security of every future presidential campaign event in the country. You brief Congress, answering questions from lawmakers who have never stood a post in their lives, but hold your budget and your agency's future in their hands. You manage crises that never touch the news because your entire career has been built on making sure they never need to. You mentor the next generation of agents the way someone once mentored you, watching rookies walk through the same doors you walked through decades earlier, terrified in exactly the way you once were. And you recognize your younger self in every one of their nervous, over-prepared answers. You realize, somewhere in this role, that leadership means carrying everyone's fear at once, instead of just your own. The rookie's fear of failing, the shift leader's fear for their team, the family's fear they'll never say out loud. Level 12, Director of the United States Secret Service, and then the summit of an entire life's work, Director. You answer directly to the highest levels of government. You are responsible for the safety of the president, the vice president, their families, visiting heads of state, and the financial integrity systems the agency was founded to protect over a century and a half ago. When something goes wrong anywhere in the agency, anywhere in the country, it eventually lands on your desk at any hour with no warning. You think back in quiet moments between meetings to the recruit who once sat wired to a polygraph machine, terrified of failing before he'd even begun. You think of the shaking hands on your first raid, the rope line in the rain, the advance routes memorized street by street, hospital by hospital, the agents you trained who are now training others, carrying forward instincts you gave them without ever fully realizing it. You think of every nothing happened that the world will never know was a triumph, because the entire purpose of this life was to make sure nothing ever did. Level 13, the legacy. You started as a name in a file, unsure if you'd survive the polygraph. You end as the person entrusted with the survival of a nation's leadership, its history, and its future. Nobody will ever know most of what you did. That was always the point. The mark of a perfect career in the Secret Service isn't a headline, it's silence. The specific, deliberate silence of history moving forward exactly as it was supposed to, because you and thousands like you made sure nothing ever interrupted it. You didn't just have a career, you disappeared into something larger than yourself. And in doing so, you became the reason so many ordinary days stayed ordinary. That was always the job, and you did it.